She fled at the altar and hid at the farm of a man who had already lost everything, but what seemed like refuge turned into a forbidden romance. Watch this story until the end. You'll be surprised by this tale. If you enjoy love stories and romance, subscribe to this channel, leave your comment. We post videos like this every day. Continuing. Silence was the only luxury that Isabella Parker still possessed. On the humid mornings in rural Virginia, when the sun rose behind the mountains and painted the coffee plantations golden as far as the eye could see, she would sit on the farmhouse porch and allow those few minutes of peace to fill the emptiness that grew in her chest with each passing day. At 27, Isabella knew she was considered a spinster by the region's standards. Women her age already had at least 2 children clinging to their skirts, some even 3. But she remained untouched, not by spiritual choice or religious vocation, as her Aunt Elaine liked to whisper at church gatherings, but because of a suffocating vigilance that stifled any possibility of intimacy with the outside world. The Parker house was a fortress of traditions. The thick adobe walls seemed to absorb not only the scorching heat of the Virginia summer, but also the truths that were never spoken aloud. There, glances carried more weight than words, and censure was served alongside breakfast, seasoned with the obedient silence expected from the women of the family. Isabella had grown up hearing that a proper young woman prepared herself for only one destiny: marriage. Not just any marriage, but one that was convenient for her father's business, for the family's reputation, for maintaining the power that the Parkers had exercised in the region for generations. Her desires, her dreams, her wishes were luxuries that an obedient daughter could not afford to cultivate. Colonel Augustus Parker, her father, was a man of few words and many decisions. Owner of lands that stretched for miles, his word was respected. From Irving to Union County, when he spoke, everyone listened. When he decided, no one questioned. And when he announced, one March afternoon, that he had arranged his daughter's marriage to Oliver Anderson, the silence that followed was so dense, it seemed solid. Oliver Anderson. Just hearing the name sent a chill down Isabella's spine that had nothing to do with the breeze coming down from the mountains. A state representative for 15 years, owner of political influence that extended far beyond the borders of Virginia, Oliver was a man who inspired more fear than respect, though few were brave enough to admit it aloud. 20 years her senior, Oliver had been married twice before. Twice widowed. His first wife, Charlotte, had died in a car accident on a deserted road on a night without rain or fog. The second, Vanessa, had been found drowned in the house pool on a sunny afternoon, despite knowing how to swim since childhood. 2 deaths, 2 investigations that went nowhere, 2 funerals where Oliver shed the right tears at the right time in front of the right people. The women of the region whispered about him when their husbands weren't around. They said he had ice-cold eyes, that he smiled too little for a man in a position of power, that his presence changed the temperature of any room. But they whispered very softly, because Oliver Anderson had ears everywhere and a memory for every face. When Isabella first saw him at a political gathering at the Parker house, something inside her screamed to run. He was courteous, educated, said all the appropriate words to a family daughter, but his eyes assessed her like one examines an animal at auction, measuring value, calculating possibilities, planning the use he would make of that acquisition. From that day on, Oliver's visits became frequent, always accompanied by gifts too expensive to refuse, always with long conversations with Colonel Augustus in the sitting room, always with glances at Isabella that lasted too long to be casual. She learned to hide in her room when she heard the sound of his truck coming up the dirt road. She learned to fake headaches when her mother called her to serve coffee to the men. She learned that escape, even within her own home, was an art that required creativity and courage. But there was no escaping the official engagement announcement. One April morning, Colonel Augustus gathered the family in the main room and declared that the wedding would take place at the end of the month. Isabella felt her legs weaken. Her mother, Mrs. Catherine, shed tears that could have been of joy or despair. It was impossible to tell. Her younger sisters congratulated her with hollow voices, eyes that avoided hers. That night, Isabella couldn't sleep. She stood at her bedroom window, looking at the stars shining above the fields, trying to imagine what her life would be like a month from now. Would it be a life, or would it just be an existence, measured in days survived, in forced smiles, in silent obedience, until some inexplicable accident freed her? It was on the eve of the wedding that everything changed. Isabella was packing her few personal belongings in a leather suitcase that had belonged to her grandmother when she decided to search through her mother's box of objects one last time. It was a simple wooden box kept on top of the wardrobe, full of yellowed photographs, old letters, and small sentimental treasures that Mrs. Catherine had collected throughout her life. Isabella knew every item in that box. The love letters her father had written during their courtship when he was still capable of sweet words. The wedding photographs where the two looked genuinely happy. Her and her sister's birth certificates, great-grandmother's rosary, small mementos of a life that seemed to have been happy, at least in the beginning. But it was while leafing through a prayer book, a small Bible with pages as thin as silk paper, that her fingers felt something strange in the cover lining, an irregularity, as if something was hidden there. Carefully, she unpicked a piece of the thread that held the fabric and found a sheet of paper folded in four, yellowed with time. The handwriting was her mother's. She recognized it immediately, but it was different from the writing she knew. Trembling, hurried, as if it had been written under pressure or fear, and the words she read made her heart stop for a moment, then race at a speed that left her breathless. My dear daughter, if you are reading this, it is because the moment I have always feared has arrived. Never trust Oliver Anderson, and if one day you are promised to him, run, for yourself, for me, for all the women he has silenced. Your grandmother did not die of pneumonia, as they told you. I was running away with you when they found me. The rest of the story you must discover on your own, but never, never marry him. I love you more than life, more than my own safety. That is why I write these words, Catherine Moeller Parker. Isabella read the letter 3 times before she could fully process what was written there. Her maternal grandmother had died when she was very young, but they had always told her it was from pneumonia, a natural death, expected for a woman of her age. But here was the truth, written in the trembling hand of a woman who knew the danger surrounding her daughter. Isabella's hands shook as she carefully folded the letter and held it against her heart. For the first time in her life, she felt her grandmother's presence in a living, real way, as if she were there in the room, whispering courage in her ears. And it was at that moment that the decision formed in her mind, clear and inevitable as the rising sun. She would not marry Oliver Anderson. She would flee that very night. The night was humid, without a breath of wind to ease the heat that stuck to the skin like a second layer of clothing. Isabella waited until she was sure everyone in the house was sound asleep. She put on a light cotton dress, sky blue like the morning sky, slipped on her most durable leather boots, and placed in a cloth bag a change of clothes and a few belongings. Her grandmother's letter was folded and tucked into her dress pocket close to her heart. She knew every floorboard in the house, knew exactly where to step to avoid making noise. She crossed the hallway with bare feet, boots in hand, heart beating so hard she was certain it would wake the whole family. But the silence remained intact. The farm gate seemed bigger than ever as she approached it. For a moment, she hesitated. Beyond that gate was the unknown world, full of dangers she couldn't even name. But behind her was Oliver Anderson, and that was more frightening than anything she might find on the road. She pushed the gate slowly, mentally thanking her father for always keeping the hinges well-oiled. The creak was minimal, muffled by the song of crickets and the distant sound of some nocturnal animal, and then she was on the other side, free. She began to walk along the dirt road, her boots making a soft sound against the sand and small stones. The moon was almost full, illuminating the path with a silvery light that transformed the familiar landscape into something magical and strange. The fields stretched on both sides of the road, the plants forming shadows that danced when the breeze finally came, bringing momentary relief from the heat. Isabella didn't have a definite destination. She only knew she needed to get as far away from the farm as possible before her absence was discovered. She had been walking for hours when her legs began to weaken. Her body, accustomed to the sedentary life of the house, protested against the prolonged effort. Her breathing became short, sweat stuck her dress to her skin, and her throat was as dry as sand. It was when the sky began to lighten on the horizon that she finally collapsed. Her legs gave way first. Then her whole body seemed to melt, and she found herself sitting in the middle of the road without the strength to continue. The tears came then, hot and salty, washing away all the fear, all the courage, all the determination that had brought her this far. This is how Vincent Morgan found her. He was driving down the road in an old pickup truck carrying feed for the cattle when he saw a human figure collapsed in the middle of the path. At first, he thought it was an accident, someone who had been hit and abandoned there. But as he approached, he saw it was a young woman, conscious, just exhausted. Vincent was a 35-year-old man who had learned to be wary of surprises. He lived in an isolated house on top of a hill, surrounded by native forest and silence, raising horses and avoiding contact with other people as much as possible. But there was something about the figure of this woman, vulnerable yet defiant, that touched a part of him he thought had been dead for a long time. He stopped the truck and got out, approaching slowly so as not to frighten her. "Miss, are you all right? What happened?" Isabella raised her eyes to him, and Vincent felt something strange happen in his chest. She was beautiful, but it wasn't her beauty that impressed him. It was the courage he saw in those dark eyes, mixed with a fear she was trying hard to hide. I got lost," she lied, her voice hoarse from thirst and exhaustion. "I was running away from a man who wanted to hurt me." Vincent didn't press for more details. He knew well the weight of secrets and respected everyone's right to carry their own. He offered her water from a bottle he had in the truck, then extended his hand to help her up. "Do you have somewhere to go?" Isabella shook her head, and Vincent saw something in her eyes that he immediately recognized, the look of someone who had nothing left to lose. "Then come with me," he said, simply. "I have a house on the hill. You can rest there until you decide what to do." And so, when the sun rose completely over the Virginia mountains, Isabella Parker climbed into Vincent Morgan's truck and headed for a place she didn't know, with a man she didn't know, carrying only a dust-stained dress, a yellowed letter, and the courage she had inherited from a grandmother who died trying to protect those she loved. Vincent Morgan's house stood on top of the hill like a solitary sentinel, surrounded by native forest that whispered ancient secrets in the wind. It was a simple construction of wood and stone, but solid, with wide porches that embraced the main structure and offered a privileged view of the valley that stretched as far as the eye could see. Isabella felt a strange peace upon seeing it, as if that place had been built specifically to serve as a refuge for wounded souls. The truck climbed the steep and irregular road, the tires fighting against the loose earth and the stones that rolled down the slope. Vincent drove in silence, respecting the visible exhaustion of the woman beside him, but now and then he cast discreet glances at her, trying to understand what kind of storm had brought this delicate yet defiant creature to the middle of the road that early morning. Isabella observed the landscape that unfolded around them with a mixture of fascination and apprehension. She had never been so far from the Parker farm, had never seen the world from such a high perspective. Down below, the valley stretched in shades of green that varied from the lightest to the darkest, dotted with small farms, corrals where cattle grazed peacefully, and streams that wound between the trees like silver ribbons. When they finally stopped in front of the house, Isabella saw a figure on the porch that made her hesitate before getting out of the truck. It was a middle-aged woman, as thin as a dry branch, with grey hair tied in a low bun, and eyes that seemed to see more than they should. She didn't say anything when Vincent and Isabella approached, just observed the newcomer with an intensity that made Isabella feel as if she were being weighed and measured. "This is my sister Claire," said Vincent, his voice carrying a tenderness he had not shown before. "She doesn't speak, but she understands everything and sees more than most people who talk too much." Claire approached Isabella with silent steps, and for a moment the two women stared at each other. Then, unexpectedly, Claire extended her hand and gently touched Isabella's face, as a mother would do with an injured daughter. Her eyes filled with a deep understanding, as if she could see through the brave facade that Isabella was trying to maintain, and look directly at the pain and fear she carried. After this moment, Claire motioned for them to follow her, and entered the house. Vincent gestured for Isabella to go ahead, and she found herself entering a spacious room with a high ceiling and large windows that let natural light flood the environment. The decoration was simple but welcoming: dark wood furniture, cushions in earthy tones, green plants in clay pots, and a stone fireplace that dominated one of the walls. But what most caught Isabella's attention were the drawings. They were everywhere, on the walls, on the coffee table, scattered on the sofa. Hand-drawn sketches in charcoal and pencil depicting landscapes, animals, people and scenes that seemed to come from dreams or nightmares. They were all signed with a discreet C in the lower right corner. "Claire draws," explained Vincent, noticing Isabella's interest. "It's her way of talking to the world. Sometimes it's the only way we know what she's thinking." Claire had disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a tray containing strong coffee, still warm homemade bread, white cheese, and red fruit jam. She placed everything on the table with precise gestures and then sat in a chair near the window from where she could observe Isabella without seeming indiscreet. "Eat," said Vincent, pouring coffee into a white porcelain mug. "You must be hungry." Isabella hadn't realized how famished she was until she smelled the coffee and fresh bread. She ate with a hunger she hadn't felt in years, as if the taste of homemade food awakened something primitive in her body. Vincent watched her eat with quiet satisfaction, and she realized it had been a long time since someone had cared about her well-being in such a genuine way. "You can stay here as long as you need," he said when she finished eating. "There's a room at the back of the house that we don't use. It's simple but clean and safe. Nobody comes up here without a special reason." Isabella felt her eyes fill with tears, but this time they weren't tears of fear or despair. It was pure gratitude mixed with a relief so deep it made her dizzy. She had spent her entire life being controlled, watched, molded according to the will of others, and now a man she barely knew was offering her something she had never experienced: freedom. "Why are you doing this for me?" she asked, her voice choked. Vincent was silent for a long moment, his eyes lost in the landscape that could be seen through the window. When he finally answered, there was a melancholy in his voice that made Isabella's heart contract. Because I know what it's like to run from something that wants to destroy you, and I know what it's like to need a safe place to heal. That afternoon, while Isabella rested in the room that Vincent had prepared for her, he took care of the horses in the corral near the house. They were magnificent animals, purebred, with coats that varied from the deepest black to golden brown. But what most impressed Isabella, who watched them from the window, was the relationship that Vincent had with them. He moved among the animals with impressive naturalness, touching them, speaking softly in their ears, and they responded with a trust that only came from years of care and mutual respect. There was something hypnotic in the way he worked, a harmony between man and nature that Isabella had never witnessed. Later, when the sun began to tilt on the horizon, painting the sky in orange tones, Vincent knocked on her bedroom door. "Want to take a walk?" he asked. "There's a place nearby that you might like to see." They walked along a trail that wound through the woods, Vincent in front, making a path between branches and leaves, Isabella right behind, fascinated by the richness of the vegetation around them. The air was perfumed with aromas she couldn't name. Wildflowers, moist earth, green leaves, and the sound of birds created a natural symphony that calmed her restless soul. The trail led to a clearing where there was a small lake, almost a lagoon, with water so crystalline that it was possible to see the golden fish swimming at the bottom. Ancient trees leaned over the water, creating shadows that danced on the surface when the wind shook the branches. "This place is magical," said Isabella, her voice full of admiration. Vincent sat on a rock near the shore, and she joined him, maintaining a respectful distance but aware of how his proximity made her heart race. "I used to come here with," he began, then stopped as if the words were too difficult to say. "With whom?" Isabella asked gently. Vincent was silent for so long that she thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, laden with a pain that time had not been able to completely heal. "With Lucy, my fiancée. She died 5 years ago." Isabella felt her chest tighten. There was something in the way he said the name that revealed a still open wound, a love that death had interrupted, but failed to kill. "What happened?" she asked, knowing she perhaps shouldn't, but feeling that he needed to talk. Vincent picked up a small stone and threw it into the water, watching the concentric circles that formed on the surface. They said it was an accident. "She was found drowned here in this lake on a Sunday morning, but Lucy knew how to swim better than I did. There was something wrong, something I could never prove." He turned to look at Isabella, and she saw in his eyes a pain that she recognized, because it was similar to her own. "I withdrew from everything after that, from people, from the town, from relationships. I came to live here with Claire, and that's how we've been living since then. She draws, I take care of the horses, and we try to forget that the world down there exists." Isabella extended her hand and gently touched his arm. It was the first voluntary physical contact they had, and the electricity that passed between them was so intense that both startled. "I'm sorry," she said. "It must have been terrible to lose someone you loved like that." Vincent looked at her, and on his arm, then at her eyes, and Isabella saw something changing in his expression, a barrier being lowered, a defense being disarmed. "And you?" he asked. "What storm brought you to the middle of the road that early morning?" Isabella withdrew her hand and hugged her knees, looking at the water in the lake. For the first time since she had fled, she felt like telling the truth to someone. Not the whole truth, she wasn't ready for that yet, but enough for him to understand why she had needed to run. "I was going to marry a man I didn't love, a man who terrified me, My family had arranged everything, and I had no choice. She paused, remembering her grandmother's letter. I discovered some things that made me realize that if I stayed, I could end up like your Lucy. Vincent looked at her with renewed intensity. Was someone threatening you? Not directly, but there was a pattern. Other women, other deaths, and I knew I couldn't be the next one. They were silent for a while, two survivors sharing wounds without needing to show all the scars. When they returned to the house, the sun had already set, and Claire was waiting for them with dinner ready. It was during dinner that Isabella began to understand the dynamics of that house. Vincent and Claire had a silent communication, made of glances, gestures, and a mutual understanding that came from years of living together and taking care of each other. Claire put food on Vincent's plate without him asking. He filled her glass with water before it emptied, and the two always seemed to know what the other was thinking. But that night, Isabella noticed that Claire was observing her differently. There was something in her eyes that seemed urgent, as if she wanted to communicate something important but didn't know how. After dinner, when Vincent went out to check on the horses one last time before going to sleep, Claire approached Isabella and placed a paper on the table in front of her. It was a drawing done that same day. She could tell by the still intense color of the charcoal. The drawing showed a dark-haired woman standing at the edge of a lake. But it wasn't just any woman. It was Lucy, she was sure, even though she had never seen a photo of her, and there were details in the drawing that made Isabella's blood freeze. The woman in the drawing wasn't alone. There was a shadow behind her, an indistinct male figure, but one that emanated a palpable threat. Isabella looked at Claire, who nodded gravely, then pointed to herself and made a gesture that clearly meant, "I saw." "You saw what happened to Lucy?" Isabella whispered. Claire nodded again, then took another paper and began to draw quickly. This time, she drew a man in a suit, with a face that Isabella didn't recognize, but with a posture that seemed familiar to her. And in the corner of the paper, she drew a symbol that made Isabella's heart stop. A ring with the Anderson family. "A crest." "Oliver," Isabella whispered, and Claire nodded vigorously. When Vincent returned, he found the two women leaning over the table, Claire drawing compulsively and Isabella looking at the drawings with an expression of growing horror. He approached and saw what was being represented there. His dead fiancée, a threatening man, symbols that he didn't completely understand, but that clearly had a profound meaning for Isabella. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice tense. Isabella looked at him, then at Claire, then back at the drawings. The time had come to tell the truth, at least part of it. "The man I ran from, he wasn't just an unwanted suitor. He is Oliver Anderson, a powerful politician, and I think he may have been involved in the death of your fiancée." Vincent became very quiet, so quiet that Isabella could hear her own heart beating. When he finally spoke, his voice was laden with a cold anger that she had never heard before. "What do you mean by that?" Claire picked up another paper and began to draw again. This time, she drew the house on the hill, but at an earlier date. Isabella could see this from the details, the less dense vegetation, some constructions that no longer existed, and in the drawing there was a car parked on the road, an elegant man talking to Vincent on the porch. Vincent looked at the drawing and turned pale. "Claire, you remember that day?" She nodded and continued drawing. Now she showed the same man going down to the lake alone during the night. And in the next drawing, Lucy appeared, walking in the same direction. "My God," Vincent murmured. "He was here. Oliver Anderson was here on the day Lucy died." The pieces of a terrible puzzle began to fit together in Isabella's mind. Oliver's two dead wives, Lucy, her own grandmother, who had tried to flee and had been found dead. A pattern of silenced women, of convenient deaths, of a man who collected widows as others collected stamps. "He kills women who oppose him," she said, her voice just a whisper, "or who know too much, or who try to escape." Vincent abruptly rose from the table, the chair scraping on the wooden floor. He began to pace back and forth across the room, hands in his hair, trying to process the information he had just received. "For 5 years I thought I had been negligent," he said, "that I should have taken better care of her, protected her, more. For 5 years I blamed myself for Lucy's death." Isabella stood up and went to him, gently touching his arm as she had done that afternoon at the lake. "It wasn't your fault. You couldn't have known." He turned to her, and this time when their eyes met, there was something different there. A deeper connection, forged in the mutual understanding of pain and in the discovery that their tragedies were more connected than they had imagined. "He can't get away with it again," Vincent said, his voice low but firm. "Not after Lucy, not after you." Isabella felt a wave of emotion so intense that she could barely stand. No one had ever fought for her before. No one had ever cared enough to want to protect her. And now this man, who had lost so much because of the same monster that was pursuing her, was willing to face his own demons to keep her safe. "Vincent," she began, but he placed a finger gently on her lips. "You don't need to say anything. Just stay, at least until we figure out how to get justice for all the women he destroyed." That night, Isabella lay in the bed of the room that Vincent had prepared for her, but sleep did not come. Her mind was buzzing with everything she had discovered, with the revelation that her escape had led her exactly to where she needed to be. It wasn't a coincidence, she was sure. It was destiny or divine justice, or perhaps just the universe conspiring for the truth to finally come to light. Outside, she could hear the sounds of the night, crickets, owls, the wind in the trees, and, more distant, the soft sound of horses moving in the corral. They were sounds of peace, of safety, of a world where she could finally breathe without fear. But she also knew that this peace was temporary. Oliver would not easily give up on recovering his lost property. And when he discovered where she was, the real battle would begin. For now, however, she was safe, she was protected, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't alone in the fight. The days that followed the discovery about Lucy were marked by a growing intimacy between Isabella and Vincent that went far beyond words. It was as if the revelation about the past had knocked down the last barriers of distrust between them, creating a space where they could truly know each other, without masks or pretenses. Isabella began to help Vincent with the horses, discovering a passion for the animals that she never knew existed. Her hands, once soft and cared for, as befitted the daughter of a wealthy farmer, quickly adapted to working with the reins, to brushing the silky coats of the animals, to the daily chores that required strength and delicacy at the same time. Vincent watched, fascinated, as she transformed. The fragile and frightened woman he had found on the road was revealing herself to be someone completely different. Determined, courageous, with an inner strength that had been repressed by years of forced obedience, but that now flourished. Like a plant finally exposed to the sun. There were moments during the day when their bodies naturally drew closer, when he adjusted her position as she mounted one of the more docile horses, when she applied ointment to a wound he had gotten, while fixing a fence, when they shared the same narrow space in the stable to care for a mare about to give birth. Each touch, however innocent its origin, sent waves of electricity through both their skins. Claire observed everything with her penetrating eyes, and Isabella often caught her drawing scenes of the two of them together, Vincent teaching her, to brush a horse, the two of them sitting on the porch drinking coffee at dawn, him carrying her when she twisted her ankle on a trail. The drawings captured an intimacy and tenderness that they themselves had not yet admitted to feeling. The nights were the most intense moments. After dinner, when Claire retired to her room, Isabella and Vincent would stay in the living room, sometimes talking until late, sometimes simply sharing the comfortable silence of two people who understood each other without needing to speak. He told stories of the region, of the horses he had raised, of the rainy seasons that transformed the landscape into an endless green sea. She talked about her childhood, about the books she read in secret, about the dreams she had learned to bury so deep that she had almost forgotten she had them. One night, when a light rain began to fall on the zinc roof, creating a soft symphony, Isabella confessed something that she had never told anyone. "I've never been kissed," she said, the words coming out before she could think better of it. "I mean, I've never been really kissed by someone I wanted to kiss back." Vincent, who was adjusting the wood in the fireplace, stopped what he was doing and turned to look at her. She was sitting on the sofa, her legs tucked under her body, her nervous hands playing with the hem of the simple dress that Claire had sewn for her. "Isabella," he began, but she interrupted him. "I know it must seem ridiculous. A woman my age, and I've never experienced anything that other people consider normal." She paused, gathering courage to continue. "But I want to experience it with you." The silence that followed was charged with an electric tension that made the air in the room seem denser. Vincent approached slowly, as if he were approaching a wild animal that might be startled by sudden movements. When he finally reached the sofa, he knelt on the floor in front of her, placing his large, calloused hands over hers. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice hoarse with contained emotion. In response, she leaned forward and touched his face with one hand, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw, the small scar he had near his left ear, the lips that had become a silent obsession for her. "I've never been sure of anything in my life," she whispered, "but I'm sure of this." When he finally kissed her, it was with a gentleness that contrasted with the intensity of desire that Isabella could feel vibrating through his body. His lips were warm and soft, and the kiss began tentative, almost reverent, as if she were made of crystal and could break with too much pressure. But Isabella didn't want gentleness. She wanted to feel everything she had missed during all those years of controlled life. She deepened the kiss, her hands tangling in his dark hair, her body pressing against his with an urgency that surprised her. Vincent responded with a passion that had been sleeping for years. His hands found her waist, then moved up her back to her shoulders, tangling in her long, silky hair. The kiss became more intense, more urgent, and when they finally separated to breathe, both were panting. "Isabella," he murmured against her lips, and there was so much desire and tenderness in his voice that she felt her heart race even more. They spent hours in that room, exploring the new intimacy between them with the patience of those who knew they had time, but also with the urgency of those who had waited too long for that moment. Vincent kissed her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, his hands mapping the virgin territory of her body with a reverence that made her feel like a goddess. Isabella discovered that she had an appetite for pleasure that had been repressed for so long that it now emerged with double strength. Each touch of his awakened sensations that she didn't know existed, each kiss took her to a state of desire that was both frightening and electrifying. When they finally separated, it was almost dawn. Vincent carried her to her room, not to make love. Both instinctively knew it wasn't time yet, but to simply lie beside her, their breaths synchronizing as sleep took them together. The following days were marked by a mutual discovery that went beyond the physical. Vincent taught Isabella to shoot in case she needed to defend herself and discovered that she had an impressive natural aim. Isabella taught Vincent to read better since he had left school early to take care of the farm after his parents died, and discovered that he had a thirst for knowledge that had been neglected for years. Claire observed everything and drew, her drawings becoming more romantic, more hopeful. For the first time since Lucy's death, she began to draw flowers again, but the peace could not last forever. It was on a hot Thursday afternoon that reality caught up with them in a brutal way. Vincent had gone to town to buy supplies, leaving Isabella and Claire alone in the house. They were preparing lunch when the radio, which was playing soft country music in the kitchen, was interrupted by a news report. Police intensify the search for Isabella Parker, 27, daughter of Colonel Augustus Parker, missing for 2 weeks on the eve of her wedding to Representative Oliver Anderson. The family is offering a reward of $50,000 for information leading to the young woman's whereabouts. Representative Anderson told the press that he suspects kidnapping and demands that authorities intensify the investigation. Isabella dropped the knife she was using to cut vegetables. The metal hit the floor with a noise that echoed through the silent kitchen like a gunshot. Claire turned to look at her, eyes wide with understanding. The announcer's voice continued, "Isabella Parker is the daughter of one of the most traditional families in the region, and her connection to the representative represents an important political alliance. Anyone who has information about her whereabouts should contact local authorities immediately." When Vincent returned from town, he found Isabella sitting on the porch, looking at the valley with an expression of absolute desolation. Claire was at her side, one of her hands resting protectively on her friend's shoulder. "Isabella?" he called, but something in the air told him that something had irreversibly changed. She turned to look at him, and he saw in her eyes a mixture of shame and despair that made him immediately understand that his world was about to collapse again. "Did you hear the radio?" she asked, her voice almost inaudible. Vincent shook his head, but he was already connecting the dots. The intensified search, the reward, the name that had been mentioned, Isabella Parker, the daughter of Colonel Augustus Parker, one of the most powerful families in the region, Oliver Anderson's runaway bride. "You lied to me," he said, and there was a pain in his voice that cut Isabella's heart like a blade. "Vincent, I can explain. You lied," he repeated louder this time. "You told me you were just a woman running from a violent man. You didn't tell me you were the daughter of Colonel Augustus Parker. You didn't tell me that half the state is looking for you. You didn't tell me that by hiding you here, I was committing a crime." Isabella stood up, tears flowing freely down her face. "I was afraid. I thought that if you knew who I really was, I wouldn't have helped you," Vincent finished for her. "You're right. Because I know who your father is. I know what kind of power he has. And I know that when he finds out where you are, he'll destroy everything I've touched in life. Vincent, please." "No," he shouted, and Claire flinched at the violence in his voice. "I can't go through this again. I can't have my life destroyed because of a woman I love. Not again." The word love hung in the air between them like a confession torn out by pain. Isabella felt her heart shatter and be comforted at the same time. "You love me," she whispered. Vincent closed his eyes as if the question were physical torture. "That doesn't matter anymore. You need to leave. Today. Now." "Vincent! Now!" he shouted, and this time Claire stood up and ran into the house. Isabella knew there were no arguments that could change his decision. Vincent had lost everything once because of Oliver Anderson. He wouldn't risk losing everything again, especially when he knew that this time the danger was real and imminent. With a broken heart, she went to her room and gathered her few belongings. Her grandmother's letter, folded and refolded so many times that the paper was almost falling apart. The simple dress that Claire had made for her. The boots she had worn in her escape. When she left the house, Vincent was waiting with the truck running. He drove in silence to the main road where there was a bus stop. During the entire trip, Isabella tried to find words that could fix what had broken between them. But they all seemed inadequate, given the magnitude of the betrayal he felt. When they stopped at the bus stop, Vincent finally looked at her. "I want you to know," he said, his voice controlled with effort, "that the days we spent together were the best of my life since Lucy died. But I can't live haunted by ghosts forever." Isabella got out of the truck with eyes full of tears. When she turned to say something, to try one last time, Vincent was already driving back down the road. The bus took 40 minutes to arrive. 40 minutes in which Isabella was alone by the side of the road, watching Vincent's truck disappear among the hills, wondering if she had made the right decision in fleeing or if she should have stayed and faced the consequences of her birth and the name she carried. When the bus finally appeared on the horizon, she didn't know where to go. She couldn't go back home. Oliver would be waiting. She couldn't stay in the region. She would be recognized in any nearby town. She decided to go to Richmond, where she could lose herself in the crowd of a big city until she figured out what to do with the rest of her life. But she never made it to Richmond. The bus had traveled only a few miles when it was intercepted by two black cars that appeared like vultures on the road. They weren't police cars. Isabella knew this immediately by the type of men who got out of the vehicles, brutal, professional, with the kind of look that made no distinction between legal and illegal orders. "Isabella Parker?" asked the one who seemed to be the leader, a short, stocky man with a scar that ran from his forehead to his right cheek. She thought about lying, but she knew it was useless. They obviously knew exactly who they were looking for. "That's me," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Representative Anderson wants to talk to you, now." It wasn't an invitation. The other bus passengers watched in terrified silence as Isabella was escorted to one of the cars. The bus driver didn't even try to intervene. He knew to recognize the type of situation where it was better to pretend he hadn't seen anything. Isabella was placed in the back seat of one of the cars, squeezed between two men who smelled of sweat and violence. During the trip, she tried to think of a way to escape, but she knew there was none. Oliver had finally gotten what he wanted. She was back under his control. But then, something happened that she didn't expect. The car in front slowed down abruptly, causing the driver of the car she was in to brake hard. Through the windshield, Isabella saw an old pickup truck parked in the middle of the road, blocking the passage. Vincent. He got out of the truck with a rifle in his hand, his face a mask of cold determination. There was something different about him. He was no longer the gentle and protective man she had learned to love. He was someone dangerous, someone who had decided he had little to lose and much to fight for. "Release the woman," he shouted, his voice echoing down the empty road. The thugs laughed. It was 4 against 1 and they were armed too, but Vincent knew that region like the back of his hand, knew every curve of the road, every stone, every tree that could serve as cover. What happened next was quick and violent. The first shot came from the car in front. Vincent threw himself behind the truck, using it as a shield, and retaliated with a precision that made Isabella understand that there was more to his past than he had told. Perhaps military service, perhaps just years of hunting in the woods. Around the farm. "Run!" he shouted to her when he saw an opportunity. Isabella took advantage of the confusion to extricate herself from the men holding her and run to the side of the road where the dense vegetation could offer some protection. One of the thugs followed her, but Vincent took him down with a well-placed shot to the shoulder before he could reach her. The fight lasted almost 10 minutes. When it ended, 2 of the thugs were wounded, 1 was dead, and the 4th had fled in the car, promising to return with reinforcements. Vincent had taken a grazing shot to the shoulder, but he was alive and functional. Isabella ran to him, and when they touched, it was as if an electric current passed between them. All the resentments, all the hurt feelings, all the misunderstandings, dissolved in the face of the reality that he had risked his life to save her. "Why?" she asked as she improvised a bandage for his wound with a piece of fabric torn from her own clothes. "Because," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion and physical pain, "I realized I would rather live dangerously by your side than live in safety without you." They returned together to the house on the hill, knowing it was only a matter of time before Oliver sent more men. But this time, they would be prepared. This time, they would fight together. Claire was waiting for them on the porch, a new drawing in her hands. It was an image of the 2 of them together, but not like the previous romantic drawings. This time, they were standing side by side, looking at a distant horizon, hands intertwined, 2 figures against the world. That night, when the danger had passed and the wounds had been treated, Vincent and Isabella finally consummated the love that had been growing between them since their first meeting on the road. It was a union not only of bodies, but of souls that had found in each other the completeness that both were seeking. Isabella discovered that making love had nothing to do with the clinical and cold stories she had heard from the married women in town. It was fire and tenderness, passion and delicacy, an ancient dance between 2 beings who recognized each other as halves of a whole. Vincent discovered that it was possible to love again without betraying Lucy's memory, that the human heart had an infinite capacity for love, and that Isabella wasn't taking anyone's place. She was creating her own place, unique and irreplaceable. When dawn broke, they knew that the war was just beginning. Oliver wouldn't stop until he had Isabella back or saw her dead, but they also knew that together they had a chance to win a battle they had been losing alone for years. Claire appeared at breakfast with more drawings. This time, she showed scenes of justice being done, truths being revealed, and a powerful man finally paying for the crimes he had committed. The final fight was about to begin. The days following the confrontation on the road were marked by a silent urgency that permeated every moment in the house on the hill. Vincent and Isabella knew they had won only one battle, not the war. Oliver would regroup his forces, would use all his political influence to transform Vincent into the villain of the story, and it would be only a matter of time until he got what he wanted, Isabella back under his control, or dead. But something had fundamentally changed between them after the night they finally completely surrendered to each other. There was a new determination in Isabella's eyes, a strength that came not only from the love she felt for Vincent, but from the understanding that she was part of a cycle of violence that needed to be broken, not just for her, but for all the women Oliver had silenced over the years. Claire became an invaluable ally in this mission. Her drawings, which at first seemed to be just fragments of traumatic memories, began to reveal a much more complex and sinister pattern when organized. Chronologically, Vincent and Isabella spent hours studying every detail, every symbol, every figure represented in the yellowed papers. What they discovered was terrifying in its systematization. Claire had witnessed much more than Lucy's death. Through her drawings, it became clear that she had seen Oliver on the property on various occasions over the years, always under suspicious circumstances. There were drawings of him talking to men who clearly weren't farmers or casual visitors, men in suits in expensive cars, men with guns, men who disappeared into the woods during the night. One of the most revealing drawings showed Oliver giving Money to a man that Isabella immediately recognized. It was James Smith, the region's medical examiner, known for his ability to not see certain things when the price was right. Another drawing showed the same doctor leaving the house where Lucy's body had been examined, with the expression of someone who had completed a dirty job. "He bought the medical report," Vincent said, his voice laden with a cold anger that Isabella had learned to recognize. James changed the cause of Lucy's death to accidental drowning. Isabella studied other drawings with renewed attention. There was one that showed her own grandmother, a woman she recognized from old family photographs, talking to a man on a dark road. The man had Oliver's physical characteristics, but younger, perhaps 25 years ago. "My grandmother knew Oliver for decades," she murmured, the pieces of the puzzle fitting together with frightening clarity. "He didn't start killing women. Recently, he's been doing this for generations." Vincent picked up another drawing, this one more recent. It showed the Parker house itself, but from an aerial perspective that suggested Claire had observed from a distance. In the drawing, there were cars parked in the yard, armed men, and a female figure being carried out of the house, clearly against her will. "She saw my escape," Isabella realized. "Claire was watching me the night I fled." This explained why Vincent had found her so easily. It hadn't been a coincidence. Claire had seen Isabella flee, had sensed the danger, and had guided her brother to her in some way that only the two of them completely understood. But the most important drawing of all was the last one Claire produced. It was a detailed map showing a specific location in the woods near the lake where Lucy had been found. On the map, there was a mark in the shape of an X, and beside it, the drawing of buried objects, jewelry, documents, and what was clearly a cell phone. Vincent looked at the drawing for a long time, then at Claire, who nodded gravely. "You know where the evidence is," he said. It wasn't a question. Claire picked up a pencil and wrote on a sheet of paper with a trembling but legible handwriting. "I saw him hide it. Night she died." That same afternoon, Vincent and Isabella walked to the location indicated on Claire's map. It was a dense area of the woods near the lake, but hidden by a cluster of rocks and vegetation that made it almost invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly where to look. They dug for almost 2 hours before finding what they were looking for. Wrapped in plastic and buried a meter deep, there was a metal chest containing items that made both their blood freeze. Lucy's cell phone, with messages she had sent to a friend on the night of her death, describing her intention to end her relationship with Vincent and move to another town. The messages abruptly stopped at 11:47 p.m. Jewelry that had belonged to Oliver's first 2 wives, including wedding rings that should have been buried with them, and most disturbing of all, a detailed diary written by Oliver himself, documenting not only the deaths he had caused, but his plans for future acquisitions. Isabella's name appeared in the last entry, along with specific details about how he planned to domesticate her after the wedding. "He's a psychopath," Isabella whispered, leafing through the pages with trembling hands. "He documents the murders as if they were conquests." Vincent read over her shoulder, and Isabella could feel the tension increasing in his body with each word. When they reached the part about Lucy, he had to step away, hands in his hair, fighting to control the anger that threatened to consume him. "He describes how she begged," Vincent said, his voice broken. "How she tried to swim away from him, how he held her under the water until—" Isabella closed the diary and hugged him, feeling his body tremble with anger and pain. They stayed like that for a long time, 2 survivors embracing in the woods, surrounded by the evidence of a cruelty that seemed to have no limits, but now they had proof. Concrete, documented, irrefutable proof. The decision of how to use this evidence wasn't easy. Vincent wanted to go directly to the police, but Isabella knew that Oliver's influence extended deeply through the local institutions. Many police officers, judges, and prosecutors owed him favors or were simply too afraid of his retaliation to act impartially. "We need to make this public," she said. "We need to expose everything at once, in a way that he can't control or suppress." The opportunity came sooner than they expected. 3 days after discovering the buried evidence, Vincent was awakened by an insistent knock on the door. It was 5 in the morning, and when he opened it, he found 4 police officers with an arrest warrant in his name. "Vincent Morgan," said the sheriff, a man he knew by sight. "You're under arrest on suspicion of kidnapping and false imprisonment of Isabella Parker." Isabella appeared in the living room in pajamas, her hair disheveled, her eyes still heavy with sleep. "What kidnapping?" she said. "I'm here of my own free will." "Miss Parker," said the sheriff without looking her directly in the eyes, "Representative Oliver Anderson has presented evidence that Mr. Morgan is keeping you here against your will, and that you are suffering from Stockholm Syndrome. It was diabolically clever." Oliver had transformed the love between them into a pathology, protection into crime, the victim into an unconscious accomplice. Vincent didn't resist the arrest. He knew that any resistance would be used against him, and he trusted that Isabella would find a way to reverse the situation. When they took him away in handcuffs, he held her gaze until the last possible moment. "Trust me," she said, and there was a determination in her voice that he had never heard before. Isabella knew she had little time. Once Vincent was in the prison system, it would be easy for Oliver to fabricate more evidence against him, or simply have him suffer an accident in jail. She needed to act quickly, and she needed to act intelligently. Her first stop was at Claire's house, who had witnessed the arrest with eyes wide with terror. Isabella found the older woman sitting in the kitchen, compulsively drawing, figures of uniformed men, bars, and Vincent alone in a small cell. "Claire," Isabella said gently, kneeling beside her chair, "I need you to be very brave. I need you to help me save your brother." Claire looked at her with eyes that glistened with unshed tears, then nodded vigorously. "You'll have to speak," Isabella said. "I know it's scary. I know you haven't spoken in a long time, but you're the only person who can testify to what you saw. You're the only one who can prove Vincent's innocence." Claire was silent for a long moment. Then, with a voice hoarse from disuse, but surprisingly clear, she said, "I'll speak for Vincent." They were the first words she had said in 20 years. Isabella's plan was audacious and risky. Instead of trying to work through the corrupt system, she decided to force a public confrontation that Oliver couldn't control or manipulate. She called all the newspapers in the region, the radio stations, the local television channels. She said she had a story that would forever change regional politics, involving corruption, murders, and a conspiracy that extended for decades. She scheduled a press conference for that same afternoon in the bandstand of the town's main square, where it would be impossible for Oliver to prevent the truth from being heard. When Isabella and Claire arrived at the square, there was a crowd gathered, not just journalists, but curious citizens who had heard rumors about the press conference. Oliver was there too, surrounded by his advisors and thugs, his face a mask of confidence that couldn't completely hide the concern in his eyes. Colonel Augustus Parker was also present, standing at a respectful distance from Oliver, but clearly not as an ally. Isabella could see in her father's face a mixture of shame, fear, and something that could be pride for what his daughter was about to do. Isabella climbed to the bandstand with Claire at her side and the chest of evidence at her feet. Her voice, amplified by the microphone that the journalists had installed, echoed through the silent square. "My name is Isabella Parker," she began, "and I was not kidnapped. I fled from the arranged marriage to Representative Oliver Anderson because I discovered that he is a serial killer who has been murdering women for decades." A shocked murmur ran through the crowd. Oliver stepped forward as if to interrupt, but Isabella continued before he could speak. "I have proof," she said, raising Oliver's diary for everyone to see. "I have the diary where he documents the murders of his 2 wives, of my grandmother, of Lucy Morgan, Vincent Morgan's fiancée, and of at least 6 other women over the past 25 years. This time, the murmur transformed into shouts of indignation and disbelief. Oliver tried to approach the bandstand, but was prevented by reporters who now surrounded him, cameras and microphones pointed in his direction like weapons. "Those are lies," he shouted. "She's delirious. She was held captive for weeks. She's suffering from psychological trauma." "Then explain this," Isabella said, holding up Lucy's phone. Lucy Morgan's cell phone, with messages sent on the night of her death, proving that she was planning to leave you. Explain the jewelry of your dead wives, which should have been buried with them. Explain why you documented each murder in intimate and morbid detail. The crowd was becoming hostile. People who had known the dead women, who had whispered about the convenient deaths for years, now saw their suspicions confirmed in the most brutal way possible. It was then that Claire approached. "The microphone. I saw," she said, her voice weak but audible throughout the silence that fell over the square. "I saw him kill Lucy. I saw him bury the evidence. I saw him kill other women. I didn't speak for 20 years because I was afraid, but I can't stay silent anymore while my brother is accused of crimes that this man committed." The impact of Claire's testimony was devastating. Here was a woman known in the region for her silence, who hadn't said a word in 2 decades, risking everything to speak the truth. Her credibility was unquestionable precisely because she had never spoken before. Oliver tried one last desperate gambit. "She's lying," he shouted. "They're both working together to frame me. It's a conspiracy." But no one was listening anymore. The crowd had become a mob, and police officers who weren't in Oliver's pocket began to approach him with handcuffs in their hands. The press coverage had become live, and the evidence was being transmitted in real time to the entire state. There was no way to suppress the scandal anymore. Oliver was arrested right there, in the square, in front of the cameras and hundreds of witnesses. When the handcuffs closed on his wrists, he looked directly at Isabella with a hatred so pure that she felt a chill run down her spine. "This isn't over," he said, the words barely audible above the noise of the crowd. But Isabella knew he was wrong. It was over, at least for him. Vincent was released that same night, all charges against him withdrawn. When Isabella saw him walking through the door of the sheriff's office, she ran into his arms with a force that almost knocked them both to the ground. They kissed right there in the street, under the flashes of cameras and the shouts of support from the crowd that had gathered. "You did it," he murmured against her lips. "You succeeded." "We did it," she corrected. "All of us." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of investigations, trials, and revelations that shook the power structures of the entire region. Oliver's diary led to the discovery of a network of corruption that included police officers, judges, politicians, and businessmen. Bodies were exhumed, medical reports were re-examined, and the true extent of Oliver's crimes was finally revealed. He was sentenced to 16 consecutive life sentences, 1 for each woman he had murdered. He died in prison 3 years later, according to official reports, of natural causes. But there were rumors that other prisoners, men who had daughters and wives, had decided to carry out their own justice. Colonel Augustus Parker withdrew from political life, sold most of his lands, and moved to a small town in Western Virginia. where he spent the last years of his life trying to compensate for the years in which he had been a silent accomplice to a monster. Before leaving, he asked his daughter for forgiveness in a way she never imagined would be possible. "I knew," he admitted one afternoon, the two of them sitting on the porch of the Parker house that would soon be sold. "Not everything, but enough to have done something, and I didn't do it because maintaining power was more important than protecting my own daughter. I'll never forgive myself for that." Isabella held her father's hand, a hand calloused from years of hard work, but that now trembled with the weight of guilt. "The important thing is that in the end you made the right choice," she said, "and that meant everything to me." Vincent and Isabella married in a simple ceremony in the town church, with Claire as maid of honor and a few close friends as witnesses. It wasn't the wedding that Isabella's family had dreamed for her. There was no imported wedding dress, no grand party, no political alliances being sealed. But it was the wedding she had always dreamed of without knowing she was dreaming. A celebration of genuine love between two people who had chosen to be together against all odds. They continued to live in the house on the hill, but now it was renovated and expanded to accommodate the growing family. Claire, who had found her voice again, became one of the most respected artists in the region, her drawings evolving from documents of trauma to celebrations of the life and love that had triumphed over darkness. Isabella discovered that she had a natural talent for working with horses, and together with Vincent, they transformed the property into one of the most respected breeding farms in the state. But more important than the horses were the women they began to help, women fleeing from abusive relationships, women who needed a safe place to rebuild their lives, women who had lost hope and needed to rediscover their strength. The house on the hill became a refuge, just as it had been for Isabella on that first morning when Vincent found her on the road. Years later, when Isabella was on the porch watching the sun set over the valley, her hand resting on her belly, where her first child was growing, she thought of her grandmother's letter that had changed everything. The letter was framed now, hanging on the wall of the living room, a reminder that sometimes the courage to change our lives comes from the most unexpected places. Vincent approached from behind and hugged her, his hands covering hers over her rounded belly. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice warm against her ear. Isabella leaned back against his chest, feeling the solid strength of his body, the constant rhythm of his breathing, the security of his arms around her. "I'm thinking that sometimes the greatest tragedies of our lives are just the beginning of our greatest victories," she said. "I'm thinking that if I hadn't fled from that house that night, I would never have found you. I would never have discovered who I really am. I would never have learned that I am capable of fighting for what I love." Vincent kissed the top of her head, and she could feel the smile on his lips. "And I'm thinking," he said, "that if Lucy could see me now, she would be happy to know that her sacrifice wasn't in vain, that her death helped save not only you, but all the other women that Oliver would have hurt." They stayed like that until the stars appeared in the sky, two survivors who had found in each other not only love, but redemption. The hill around them whispered with the sounds of the night, crickets, owls, the wind in the trees, but for them it was the sound of peace. In the pocket of Isabella's dress, next to her heart, there was still a small sheet of yellowed paper. It wasn't the grandmother's letter anymore, which was framed in the living room. It was a new letter, one that she herself had written for the daughter who was about to be born. "My dear daughter," the letter said, "when you read this, you will know that you had a brave grandmother who died trying to protect those she loved. You will know that you had a mother who learned that true love is worth any fight. And you will know that you were born into a family where women do not stay silent. In the face of injustice, where love triumphs over fear, and where each generation is stronger than the previous one. Never forget that. Never let anyone diminish your light, and if one day you need courage to face your own monsters, remember that you carry in your blood the strength of all the women who came before you. Silence was no longer the only luxury that Isabella possessed. Now she had a voice, she had love, she had the freedom to choose her own destiny. And most important of all, she had the certainty that she had broken a cycle of violence that had perpetuated for generations. In the house on the hill, where two wounded souls had found and healed each other, life continued, stronger, more beautiful, and infinitely freer than either of them had dreamed possible. And sometimes, on the quietest nights, when the wind blew from the valley bringing the scent of wildflowers, they could swear they heard the voices of all the women who hadn't